Hello and welcome to this heatwave edition of Indo Politics. We're here inside our air-conditioned studio while the world bakes outside. I'm joined by our political reporter, Aisling Moloney, to discuss events of the past week, both at home and abroad, because that's where I'm going to start, Aisling. Significant developments over in London with Keir Starmer standing down and being replaced by one of our own.
Yeah, it feels like everybody's one of our own these days. All these heads of state seem to have some sort of connection to Ireland, and Andy Burnham...
Except for Trump, we don't acknowledge it.
Well, look, the golf course is probably enough of a connection, certainly for the Irish government. So he is Irish, essentially. He has Irish connections going back to Drogheda. His families were Irish dockers coming over in the late 1900s. And he was saying, I suppose in an interview in recent years about his music tastes, that this is a place where his Irish heritage kind of came to the fore, that the Pogues were a big influence on his life. Their album was something he listened to all the time and connected him to his Irish heritage. You saw Shane MacGowan being on stage, deliberately, I suppose, emphasising the lyric in 1844, I landed on the Liverpool shore, and there was a raucous response from the crowd, and this kind of ignited an Irishness in him. And he said to his son, in his more bleak moments, he talks about how he wants to have the sick bed of Cuchulainn played at his funeral. So there you go. That's Irishness there. I think in many ways, and also I suppose anybody who's kind of from that area of Northern England, there's a lot of connections to Ireland. It's not unusual. You can't avoid it. But also I suppose his own Northern connections is a big part of his brand, and like maybe the idea that he's going to be something different in Westminster, that the King of the North is coming down and kind of going to lay the lay of the land, get it all sorted out, because I suppose the UK, it's not looking good. It's not in a good place at the moment, but I suppose the overarching issue there is Brexit, and there was the 10 years this week of the Brexit vote and the ensuing chaos that has plagued that country now for a decade because of it.
To be fair to Keir Starmer, who is now gone out the door, he did return a level of normality to relations between Dublin and London. He was somebody you could deal with. He had a general interest in Ireland. He was sane and sensible after the chaos, as you said, of the Tory circus. And
it's funny because when Keir Starmer came in, there was a lot of hope in the Irish government that would reset British-Irish relations. And there has been, even in this past week, the heads of our government kind of saying, congratulating Keir Starmer on his term, although it's come to an end, saying that he did a lot for British-Irish relations. Particularly, like, people will remember only recently when Micheál Martin was in the Oval Office and kind of went to bat for Keir Starmer. And actually, you'll notice in the kind of political obituaries of Starmer this week, that clip of Donald Trump saying he's now Winston Churchill was used, and Micheál Martin sitting there. So it's so funny how we're wrapped up in that actual global psychodrama with the US and UK relations. And Starmer brought normality and he kind of promised a sense of boringness around politics. But such is the job of Prime Minister and leader of any country that you can never be rid of it. There are always going to be crises, scandals. We know with the Mandelson situation, which linked to Jeffrey Epstein, Keir Starmer lost one of his main advisors, Morgan McSweeney, in that situation, a Corkman. So It can never be boring for anyone, no matter how much they want it to be. But he didn't hit the right note from the minute he went in. He had a downbeat forecast, essentially, on the UK outlook, and
the absence of a vision of how to get out of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose that's where maybe the lawyer in him took over and not the politician. And
logic dictated what he was going to say, rather than sometimes you need to
bit of hope.
So Simon Harris is right then. Always be spinning. Is basically what we saw with Keir Starmer. But just that absence of being a politician, and when you look at Andy Burnham, he is very much a politician. He's always on everything coming out of him. Some of it is quite natural when he talks about his... Tom Dunn did that show the other night about Andy Burnham's top 30 albums, in which the Pogues, Rum Sodomy and the Lash featured quite prominently. So I mean, that's a natural part of him. He's a big football fan. That's a natural part of him. His Irishness is instinctive as well. It will be unusual, to say the least, to have a Catholic Prime Minister in place.
First time, I think,
Yeah, again, makes that interesting for when he does come over here. So from an Irish government perspective, okay, the king is dead, but long live the king. We're getting an upgrade really on what we had.
It's a good way to put it. And actually, it's funny because I was reading a piece at the weekend and it was talking about how Andy Burnham said, "Oh, I'm not really a biscuit man." And I was reading and I was like, "Oh, Micheál Martin will have a great thing to talk to him about."
On the table, like
they'll have the green tea, but then he added, "I'm a beer, chips, and gravy."
Oh no, he won't.
Man, which Micheál Martin won't like at all. But there is certainly hope on the horizon. I think there was a lot of welcome from Irish government in Irish government circles that Andy Burnham will be more of good tidings, I suppose, for that British-Irish relationship. And just to mention about, I suppose, when I say about Keir Starmer, he was supposed to be this person that had great insight on Northern Ireland, but actually most of the trouble around Northern Ireland, around the Assembly not sitting, had passed and it had been resolved by the time he came in. So he was never really tested on it. So it would be interesting to see. Another thing that might come up, depending on how long Andy Burnham's tenure is, and that's under intense question because none of their tenures have been very long, one compared to a lettuce, of course we remember, but whether he'll have to deal with the question of Irish unity and whether he will have to kind of appeal to his devolved governments of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and I suppose keep them in line essentially, because we had the First Minister of Wales actually in Dublin this week. I'm going to butcher his name, but I'm going to try and pronounce it. Run Iorwerth, I think that's how you say, or Rin Ap Iorwerth. Someone's going to correct me, but that's the way it is. And he was here this week and he was actually quite scathing of Keir Starmer and his attitude towards the devolved governments, particularly Wales, saying that Starmer did nothing for Wales and that, he never even met him in person, it was all over the phone, and hoping that Burnham, because he was a mayor of the Greater Manchester, which is devolved.
Get the idea of devolution and we'll go out and visit. It's a kind of a no-brainer for a new Prime Minister, just go out and travel around your United Kingdom and meet everybody.
Oh, that will be all really part and parcel of it. They'll be going to Belfast, they'll be in Glasgow, it'll be in Wales. Like, that will all be part and parcel of that taking over, getting things in line. It's just a question of, I suppose, when it happens and how it happens. And people want to get on with it.
There's a UK-EU meeting coming up quite soon. So Andy Burnham could be in Ireland quite quickly, actually. He could be over in Dublin. So we'll see. I mean, it's all told a positive. Let's take it back, though, to Dublin, because we will also be asking Andy Burnham to continue to police our skies very kindly by the RAF intercepting any rogue Russian aircraft or drones. And this issue of the triple lock has been knocking around for a while now. I'm old enough to remember to be covering the original Nice Treaty referendum, where it was. It evolved from there. This idea that we had to, give a guarantee to people. We won't send our peacekeepers out unless there is a UN mandate for it, and the Dáil and the government. And Bertie Ahern dresses up as a triple lock, and people were happy with that. Now, 25 years later, the government is saying the world has changed. It's well flagged that the triple lock was going to be abandoned. Why are Fianna Fáil backbenchers then suddenly up in arms about it?
That's completely fair. It was well flagged. It was in the programme for government that they were going to reform.
At the very least, to review it.
Yeah, well, I think a reform, they want to reform
the change is on the table now for a good while.
And even in the last Dáil, it was spoken about. We've had issues at the UN Security Council with Russia for a long time. And then you have issues with the US as well in recent years, in more recent years, I suppose. So they're looking at those tidings as well. And if that's to stop us, it kind of works in both ways. If the triple lock stops us from, putting our peacekeepers where we want them to go and we're in Irish interests. I mean, we've been in Lebanon for 10 years, I think, or so, and they're not going to be there anymore.
We're in the Leb for a good 2 generations, pretty much going back to the start. Like, it's the peacekeeping mission we most closely associated with Irish troops, very much respected across the region as a result of that. That's our connection there. And yet that mandate is going to run out and it's not going to be renewed.
No.
So suddenly there's going to be places like Lebanon that we're not going to be able to send our troops because of this.
So I think you could look at it that way as well and say, we can't exercise our right either. So, in a way, it's catch-22. And I suppose I'm interested to see where this clicks with the public, because I don't think it does.
It's not an easy one, though, to ramp up. I mean, Sinn Féin were at it a year ago, running up the presidential election, they've apologised that this is an attack on Irish neutrality and it's going to drag us into foreign wars. And, you know, it only takes 2 leaps and suddenly you end up conscription to a European army is suddenly being mentioned. Is it not an easy one for them to ramp up? And when you're seeing Fianna Fáil backbenchers win the coalition also raising concerns about it, is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the politics of this comes into it, and where the argument is won and lost, because you do have Sinn Féin making that point, as you just mentioned there, and it seems that within the Fianna Fáil party there is some also not the exact same point maybe. I'm not saying that they're copying or parroting, but I'm just saying that they are raising equal concerns around that we could get dragged in, we could have undue pressure from influences, the European Union maybe, to join in on operations maybe we're not comfortable with. But like that will come down to a vote of the Dáil and the Oireachtas as well. And actually, interestingly, I kind of posited the idea that should the triple lock then not be a vote of conscience if it's this, you know, cornerstone of Irish neutrality?
Oh, that's your Simon Harris influence again.
And then,
coming to bear,
no, but
everything should be a vote of conscience.
The government were like, no, of course it's not. It's a policy measure.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to pass, as in if the triple lock is, and it comes to a double lock, so then it's just the Dáil and the government. So the government.
And let's face it, the Dáil and the government pretty much the same thing.
Exactly, you know, but I'm curious as to whether when there are troop deployments, will that vote then maybe be a free vote? Because would you say then that they have a vote of conscience because they would be worried about undue influence and all that? Now, that hasn't been borne out yet, but I suppose we live in a very different time, and although we are a military neutral country, we're far from politically neutral. We are helping Ukraine in every sense of the word, except for, and this can be debated, you know, some sort of boots or armour on the ground.
And we're sending first aid kits, we're not sending bullets.
But we're also sending people to train some of the people who are going to Ukraine. And then also there's the question about whether we're actually accidentally or by sending Illumina to the Russian side. So we're military neutral, but we're not politically neutral. And even when it comes to Gaza, Palestine, we're very on one side of that issue as well. So it's a different world.
It will be interesting ultimately if this goes down the route of any sort of peacekeeping mission having to go to the Middle East, be it Gaza, the West Bank, the mandate in Lebanon. It will cast it in a different light, because you will have people who are saying, oh, we should be doing more for people in this region. You're going to go, okay, but you don't want a peacekeeping mission because you want the triple lock, which ultimately, you know, will mean. So there's all sorts of scenarios that to be played. Is it not just easy enough, though, for me? Like, why can't Micheál Martin just consult, you know, have a meeting with the backbenchers, bring in the Fine Gael Minister for Foreign Affairs if he needs to, and just give the lads what they're looking for, which is a bit of consultation?
I think most of the Fianna Fáil party would be asking, why can't Micheál Martin just consult us on anything? Because that's the big criticism of his leadership, that he doesn't consult the party. Now, he did this week. He took it on board, and there was going to be a period of reflection, or at least the backbenchers said that they just wanted him to reflect on what was being proposed. And I suppose he kind of assuaged their concerns by saying that this wouldn't come through anyways before the summer recess, and it wouldn't be until the autumn. So he'll have to deal with it again at that stage.
Meanwhile, would you have the EU presidency and we can't even decide upon our stance on something like this, not even neutrality in essence, it's peacekeeping. It's
kind of an Irish solution, or an Irish problem and an Irish solution all in one. You know, we brought something in and now we fought over bringing it in, and we're going to fight over bringing it out, or seeing the back of it.
It just goes on and on. And again, ultimately, governments are elected to take a decision. And here's another issue that they just can't get across the line.
Well, I think it remains to be seen whether they can or can't get it across the line. I don't know if it's the hill that some of those Fianna Fáil backbenchers want to die on, because again, as I said, this is not something
they're just making a point. We'll want to be consulted.
Yeah, I'm making a point. I mean, look, it's up to our politicians to raise red flags about issues that they see maybe that are constitutionally, or have a societal impact, or of course, in making jeopardising our neutrality. 100%, it's completely fair for them to raise a red flag around this, but it's been well flagged. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been in lockstep, as the Foreign Minister, Helen McEntee, said, and the Minister of Defence said this week. We're in lockstep on this. They seem very confident in the path that they've trodden, and it was no surprise, even when I was writing about the fact that it was going to Cabinet, it was no surprise to me that it was coming, because this is coming down the tracks.
Yeah.
So I wonder, is it the hill to die on? And people
or just making a point? Making
a point, because you risk then, if you're totally against it as it's coming in and coming through, you have to vote against it, and then you're losing the whip. And is that what you're going to do?
Not going down that far. So you see it being resolved over the course of the summer?
Yeah, I think Micheál Martin does this a lot. He'll hear their fears and try and assuage them in what way he can, by basic reassurance, I think, rather than actual major reform around what the bill entails.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. But then again, it depends on how loud those backbenchers can be. I didn't get the sense after the Fianna Fáil parliamentary party meeting that it was all that fractious of a debate. And again, I just think that there are other fish to fry. I'm not going to say bigger, because I don't want to minimise the idea that this is I don't have a decision.
Yeah, but there's no member of Cabinet coming out saying they have concerns here or objections or anything like that. So it just seems that this is a Fianna Fáil backbencher issue. So it'll have to be resolved there. It says on my card here, Oireachtas Committee on Drugs. I'm not suggesting they were on drugs. That's the Committee on Drug Reform. So basically, an Oireachtas Committee recommended this week the decriminalisation of drugs. And government came out...
Personal use, but
for personal use. And government came out and said, not a hope in hell is that happening.
Essentially. And I'm wondering, is this Indo politics on drugs or something? Will we have that now? But so yesterday, or this week, the Oireachtas Committee, as you say, on drugs, made their recommendations, and their central recommendation being that they wanted to decriminalise drugs.
And let's just be clear, that was their headline, not ours. It wasn't the media going, because I read through the report, I read the press release they issued, and it said Oireachtas Committee recommends decriminalise. So they were picking this out as the key recommendation.
Yeah, so they're decriminalising drugs for personal use, and they're saying that this was a method of combating, I suppose, addiction and I suppose stigmatisation of those who are addicts and who are addicted to drugs, essentially, and that the government needs to move away from criminalisation to a much stronger health-led approach. The government would argue they already are on a health-led approach, but the committee saying that essentially this needs to be not an issue of justice but an issue of health. And I think actually there's agreement on that broader principle that, a
more health-based approach.
Yeah, and that attitude,
more rehabilitation places, and
that attitude has changed a lot in recent years. But what the committee, I don't think, so Oireachtas committees, they make these reports, okay? And they can mean as much or as little as the government decides. And essentially, I don't see this report going very far, mainly because, the Taoiseach issued caution around moving on anywhere on this, and said that he thinks that we're already doing a health-led approach. And the Taoiseach also expressed concerns about this, decriminalising the possession of all drugs for personal use, saying that it could be basically an approval for drug use in Middle Ireland. And I suppose one thing that isn't in the report is even an age limit. So, could a child, have drugs for personal use? But the committee's report, they're not, deciding anything. They're making a recommendation.
Yeah, but there's
within their right to do that.
There's still an all-party committee.
Yeah.
As I went through the report, I didn't see a whole heck of a lot of the arguments that Jim O'Callaghan made about this, which is that where this has been tried elsewhere. He cited the British Columbia example. You could cite the Oregon example, that authorities in those countries have rolled back and have undone it and gone back to it being a more criminal justice based approach. Didn't really see that. So, are we supposed to take these things kind of seriously or not?
I wonder, is it maybe make a big statement and people might, to push things forward, and people might land somewhere in the middle? But I think it strikes a very unusual chord when you say that you would allow like heroin or cocaine. These are class A like narcotics that destroy communities and there's such a history, particularly in Ireland, of like very working class communities being absolutely destroyed, gutted by drug use. And also, I think a really important point, and it's something that when I heard this report come out yesterday, it reminded me, I was at the press conference for the 10-year, I don't want to say anniversary, but marking of the Regency attack, where the Hutch organised crime group attacked the Kinnahans and led to the murder of David Byrne. And Seamus Boland, the chief of kind of the head of the organised crime tackling unit in the Guards, was saying, as long as the decent men and women of Ireland are buying cocaine and snorting it in a nightclub, this I'm not directly quoting him, we're always going to have an issue with drug and gang violence.
Taoiseach making a similar view in the Dáil, saying, you know, there are middle class people who are fueling this drugs trade by consuming cocaine, and they're not joining the dots that by consuming your cocaine you're fueling the drug gangs because they're not in your area, they're in working class areas. So is it a strange approach by an Oireachtas committee to go for the radical, dramatic, spectacular recommendation as the one that they put up in lights, and then they actually lose some of the other, like there's good stuff in there about funding for drug rehabilitation and as you say, the more health-led approach. But that kind of gets lost when your big headline one is, decriminalise, because the government just shoots that down.
Absolutely, and some of the committee hearings were really powerful. Like they heard particularly from women who are caught up in this cycle of addiction and abuse in many cases, and then losing their children, that it's not possible in Ireland to essentially get dry or get sober without losing your children, and then that can put you back even further. It can stop you from seeking help. And like there's a myriad of issues, and look, they made a huge number of recommendations in that report. So they did touch on a lot of areas, but certainly the investment in like rehab centres, the investment in the health-led approach could always be better, and at the moment it is lacking. There isn't enough of it. And yes, there's a focus on the health-led approach, but maybe the report should have focused more on, you know, the essentially government funding or the investment in that area failing people and leading to more people being stuck in addiction cycles, because there isn't a way out for them that's feasible, that's long-term. Anybody walking through the centre of Dublin City will see exactly how bad of an issue we have with addiction in this country. It's so obvious. It's in your face. It's so confronting. And I think now people, you know, when they see that, they don't say, oh, that person, they say the system. And I think that's a change. I think more people are saying the system is against those people, and that more needs to be done for them. But at the same time, like, then you see other reports about like drug gangs grooming young children to kind of work for them, and you're like, but that's not going to be or mules, whichever. That's going to be far from improved if you criminalise for personal use. So huge. I think it's setting off a huge debate.
Okay, is that the purpose of it then?
Possibly,
it's a spark of a debate.
Yeah, and look,
but is their core point being lost because they've focused on
something too radical?
The big radical one that isn't going to happen.
And yes, and I think about this in the terms of maybe the next government, because these things move quite slowly, especially something this radical. And if it's your big policy point or your red line, I'm not sure it would be for any particular party. But let's just take, for example, Gary Gannon is the chair of the committee, I believe, and he is a Social Democrats TD. Now, if Social Democrats are going to be in the next government, potentially as a coalition partner, maybe if they increase their numbers, they could be in government with someone like Fianna Fáil. And is this issue something that they want to move on?
Is that really something they want to go into a general election campaign as a big flagship issue? We're going to decriminalise drugs, and then spend 3 weeks trying to explain. You say, well, what age is it going to be, and what drugs are you talking about, and how will that operate? Yeah, so tricky one.
Exactly, and I just don't see it being like the issue that the hill you're going to die on, for want of a better phrase, in any coalition, and I don't see it coming from either or any of the coalition partners at the moment, anyone trying to spearhead it from that area. But it does give them an impetus. It gives people arguing the point a reason to say, look, the committee said you're not investing this, you know, that there needs to be more rehab centres, that you need to do this. So there is some impetus there, or some research now to back up, or, you know, an argument to back up that more needs to be done in the area.
Okay. we are in the last week of normality before the EU presidency kicks off. So is there a sense of trepidation about this, that there's a big expectation on the Irish government? Is there a sense that, well, look, this is very hard to explain to ordinary people at home. It's not really going to connect to them. Or what's the sense as that gets going?
Yeah, it's funny. Do you know what? I've heard more talk about the VAT rate being reduced for hospitality next week, which is coming on the 1st of July, than I have about the EU presidency, which is also happening on the 1st of July. So that just shows you there where the government's even own head is at. They know that this issue is not going, or not issue, but this whole 6 months of presidency isn't really going to resonate that much with people. And to be fair, like, you know, you'd have to find a good reason to be quite interested in it. Now, I think from a farming and agricultural perspective, it probably will be something that those in those communities will keep an eye on, because generally, you know, even when I'm speaking with people about European legislation and the like, it's often farmers who know the most about European legislation because it comes down through the Common Agricultural Policy, and so there needs to be changes in that, and that's going to happen during our presidency.
Yeah, it will, because the multi-annual budgetary framework is going to be dealt with, and agriculture is a big part of that, and the European Commission want to entirely restructure funding there. So that's going to be a big part of the Irish agenda over the 6 months.
Yes, absolutely. And like, you know, I think, you know, Martin Hayden, the Agriculture Minister, has gained a lot of respect on his brief and in that area. He's a farmer himself, and has been seen to be, I suppose, kind of very active in EU circles and making sure that you know, Irish farmers particularly are stood up for. And so certainly, you know, that will be a stage for him to come out on. I think also, as you said there about the budget, so this is kind of a large piece of work that will fall on Ireland's lap, essentially, to spearhead. In the presidency, the host country kind of acts like a convener, and like an honest broker is kind of the word that all the officials use when they're briefing us on it, to kind of bring people together, knock heads together, and find compromise, because that's all. That's
you
exactly
have to go around
about
the table and know where everybody's sticking point is going to be, and try and get some sort of common agreement out of it.
And Micheál Martin, like, he's an incredibly experienced statesman. He will have great strength in that area, and it's also potentially his, you know, last lap in statesmanship.
This is a big
so
deal,
he could be using it as maybe his swan song to really achieve something.
Guiding Montenegro into the European Union.
Yes, and Albania and all the rest.
Will be,
and have them all in. So that could be something that we see in the next 6 months, him stepping up to that plate, maybe trying to make some friends in the EU for any other jobs he might be interested in.
Who knows what
Who knows? But certainly that would be a strength of ours. But also, I suppose, people and keen eyes should be on what the EU does in the next 6 months in relation to tech regulation and the regulation of social media companies, whether we pursue a ban for under 16s on social media ourselves or with the EU, because that's something that they're saying that they're
focusing because we keep saying, oh, we're going to go to the EU. We are now the EU. We're the ones that are guiding it along.
We'll put it on the agenda before AOB.
Get on with it, lads. Yeah, okay. Aisling, thank you. And we'll be back next week when Ireland's EU presidency kicks off. Big meeting in Cork. All of the European commissioners, all the cabinet ministers down there for 2 days, discussing the priorities over the course of the 6 months. So for this week, from Indo Politics, goodbye.